this is the headquarters of the Fulton County Library System. So I thank you for being here. I want to take a minute just to recognize a few people, and that is our Executive Director, Ms. Gail Holloman. And members of our Library Board of Trustees that are present. If you would just raise your hand. And of course, the Library Foundation, who graciously funded the 100 copies that you received as you walked through the door. So why are we here today? We're here to celebrate, in celebration of Juneteenth, actually. And with that, we've invited Ms. Nikole Hannah-Jones, New York Times bestseller, Pulitzer Prize winning author, investigative journalist. Today, she will be in conversation with the Rose Scott. A journalist as well, but also the host of Closer Look, of WABE's 90.1 station here in Atlanta. Are they coming out? We're going to begin this session with a reading by Ms. Nikole Hannah-Jones. So as they come out, please give them a big round of applause.
Thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. I know it's hot out there, and so I appreciate y'all being in here. And this is a space where we will not only hear from a wonderful journalist and a scholar, but also it's a space that if you feel like you want to hoop and holler and say, that's right, go ahead and do it. That's right. Like being in church. So that's what we're going to do. But first we are going to open up the audience for questions. So don't be yelling out a question while I'm asking my question. It's my time. But we will get to your questions because I think it's important that Nikole here from the community, I can call her Nikole, right? Yeah. I think it's important for the community to be part of the conversation. You don't need people talking at you all the time. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and let Nikole open it up.
Okay. Oh, I think they're both working now. Hello, Atlanta. This audience looks so good. And when they were reading our little bios and y'all were clapping for everything, I said, we're going to have a good time today. Some of y'all probably came from church. It's going to be a different type of sermon, but really, really excited to be here. I was just thinking that I don't think I've really done any big public 1619 events in Atlanta, and I don't know why, because y'all are amazing. Want to shout out my family sitting here in the front row, my Atlanta. You're not going to raise your hand or nothing?
Well, wait a minute. I want to shout out my family.
Do it.
Where y'all at? Hey, there they go.
And I especially want to shout out, it was a line of people when I rolled up here, and it is hot outside, so thank you. I know y'all going to stand in line just like that when it's time to vote in November. Okay, so I'm just going to start with a very short reading of the opening paragraphs of the opening essay for the book called Democracy. And if you open to the first photo in the book, this is my dad. And every time I give a talk about the project, I think about my dad and I think about his mother, my grandmother, Arlena Tillman. as we were discussing backstage, both who were born on a cotton plantation in Greenwood, Mississippi, and who migrated north and made my life possible. So, my dad always flew an American flag in our front yard. The blue paint on our two-story house was sometimes chipped, the fence or the rail by the stairs or the front door might occasionally fall into disrepair, but that flag always flew pristine. On our corner lot, which had been redlined by the federal government, was along the river that divided the black side from the white side of our town. How many of y'all been to Iowa? Oh, what? Why? Anybody been to Waterloo? Oh, we getting a picture afterwards, all my people. It's amazing. It's more of us who've been to Waterloo. Think I'm a user. Okay, let me get back. At the edge of our lawn, high on an aluminum pole, soared the flag, which my dad would replace with a new one as soon as it showed the slightest tatter. My dad was born into a family of sharecroppers on a white plantation in Greenwood, Mississippi, where black people bent over cotton from can't see in the morning to can't see at night, just as their enslaved ancestors had done not long before. The Mississippi of my dad's youth was an apartheid state that subjugated its black residents, almost half of the population, through breathtaking acts of violence. White residents in Mississippi lynched more black people than those in any other state in the country. And the white people in my dad's home county lynched more black residents than those in any other county in Mississippi for such crimes as entering a room occupied by white women, bumping into a white girl, or trying to start a sharecropping union. My dad's mother, like all black people in Greenwood, could not vote, use the public library, or find work other than toiling in the cotton fields or toiling in white people's houses. In the 1940s, she packed up her few belongings and her 3 small children and joined the flood of black Southerners fleeing to the north. She got off the Illinois Central Railroad in Waterloo. I'm gonna go off script just a little bit. So have any of y'all ever read Isabel Wilkerson's The Warmth of Other Suns? Yes. One of the greatest books of all time. And so then you know that the migration followed the train lines, right? So where the trains left in the south, where they went up north is where we ended up. Now, the Illinois Central went to Chicago. So to this day, I don't understand why my people didn't get off in Chicago. Somehow, our country selves said, no, we're just gonna stay on this train and get off in Iowa, and that's where we ended up. So she got off the Illinois Central Railroad in Waterloo, Iowa, only to have her hopes of the mythical promised land shattered when she learned that Jim Crow did not end at the Mason-Dixon line. Grandmama, as we called her, found a Victorian house in a segregated black neighborhood on the city's east side, and then found the work that was considered black women's work, no matter where black women lived, cleaning white people's houses. Dad, too, struggled to find promise in this land. In 1962, at the age of 17, he signed up for the Army. Like many young men, he joined in hopes of escaping poverty. But he went into the military for another reason as well, a reason common to black men. Dad hoped that if he served his country might finally treat him as an American. The Army did not end up being his way out. He was passed over for opportunities, his ambition stunted. He would be discharged under murky circumstances and then labor in a series of service jobs for the rest of his life. Like all the black men and women in my family, he believed in hard work, but like all the black men and women in my family, no matter how hard he worked, he never really got ahead. So when I was young, that flag outside our home never made sense to me. How could this black man, having seen firsthand the way this country abused black Americans, the way it refused to treat us as full citizens, proudly fly its banner? My dad had endured segregation in housing and school, discrimination in employment, and harassment by the police. He was one of the smartest people I knew, and yet by the time I was a work-study student in college, I was earning more an hour than he did. I didn't understand his patriotism. It deeply embarrassed me. I had been taught in school through cultural osmosis that the flag wasn't really ours, that our history as a people began with enslavement, and that we had contributed little to this great nation. It seemed that the closest thing Black Americans could have to cultural pride was to be found in a vague connection to Africa, a place we had never been. That my dad felt so much honor in being an American struck me as a marker of his degradation, of his acceptance of our subordination. To my young nieces and nephews out here, this line is for y'all. Like most young people, I thought I understood so much, when in fact I understood so little. Wish my daughter was here. I'm gonna go read this to her when I get home too. Because my father knew exactly what he was doing when he raised that flag. He knew that our people's contributions to building the richest and most powerful nation in this world were indelible, that the United States would simply not exist without us. Thank you.
Thank you. And while your family went to Iowa, my family got off in St. Louis, so we we were like, no, we're not going to Iowa. Before we dive into more of this, I want to go back to August 18th, 2019, the night before the New York Times is going to publish 1619. What were your thoughts? Could you sleep?
No. And my family knows I sleep very well. I go to bed at 9:30 every night. My daughter goes to bed after I do. So sleep is never a problem for me, but yes, I was so nervous. I was so anxious. I was anxious both because I knew what it took to produce this project. I knew all the Black folks, every single one of us who worked on the project cried probably multiple times working on the project. We knew the weight of what we were trying to do. I had, somehow convinced the New York Times to do the blackest shit it had ever done. So there was a lot riding on it. And I also, as someone who has had to work my way up through the industry, worked 2 jobs till I was 30 years old, worked at newspapers where I was told if I wanted to write about Black people, it would pigeonhole my career, that I wouldn't be able to be successful. So I knew that if this project was not successful, one, I feel like I would not have have paid the tribute to the ancestors that I wanted to pay, but I also knew that that would make it so much harder for other Black people behind me to pitch an ambitious project about race as well. So needless to say, I was a mess. And the other thing is I knew the project was powerful. I mean, I read every word many times. I knew the caliber of the writers. I knew the thought that went into it. But this was like tens of thousands of words on slavery. Something that we have willfully not wanted to deal with as a society. Something where even sometimes Black folks are like, why do we have to keep talking about this? Why do I have to see another movie about slavery? And my response is, you can never see enough movies on slavery, right? You can never stop talking enough about it, but you just don't know how it's gonna go out into the world. So I was a mess.
When you took that idea to the folks at the New York Times, did you get any pushback from anybody? Did you have to do any convincing that this was something that, one, would be powerful, and two, that needed to be done? And coming from the New York Times.
I didn't. And it would be a very well-educated guess to think that I would have faced pushback, and most of my career, I did face pushback for wanting to center Black stories and investigate racial inequality. But when I pitched this project, there were 2 things really in my favor. And one is advice that I give to my students that I teach all the time, which is you have to try to put yourself in a position to be undeniable. Now, you can still be denied, as we know, as I was denied by my own alma mater, UNC Chapel Hill, right? Like you can put yourself in a position and still be denied, but your odds are so much greater, right? So I had proven myself. I had delivered what our profession cares so much about, which is major awards, writing about racial inequality, showed that people would read long pieces on racial injustice. So I actually was confident. I went in, I didn't write up a pitch, I didn't write a proposal, I just went into our ideas meeting and said, did you know that this year is the 400th anniversary of slavery in America? And they were like, no. I was like, well, did you know that capitalism in America was founded on slavery? No. So I was like, well, I want to pitch a project and take over the whole magazine. And the other thing that I had going for me was I worked for Jake Silverstein, my editor-in-chief, and Elena Silverman, my direct editor, who have never told me no, who trust me, who believe when I come to them with something, I can deliver it, it's going to be good. And in fact, they have also dedicated 5 years of their life to this work. So I happened to work for people who understood the importance of what we were trying to do and believed in it. But that, again, wasn't always the case, but in this particular moment it was.
Had you not read Before the Mayflower? Y'all familiar with that? Yeah. You were a teenager, I believe, when you read that. Had you not read that by little Junior? I kind of feel like that's the beginning of the origin story for the 1619 Project. You maybe didn't know it then, but that was the origin for you. That was your moment of revelation, Nikole.
Yes, absolutely. So how many of you know Lerone Bennett? Right? He was a historian and a journalist. And he used to write for Ebony magazine, right? So he would write history for common readers. And so two things happened. You know, that I got that book because I was taking a 1-semester African American Studies elective course. So, and when we see all the attacks on African American AP, when you see the attacks on Black history, you understand why, because they don't want to create people like me, right? Because truly, like, that 1-semester course changed my life. Because you know this, when you're in school, you think that they're teaching you the most important things to know. And so if Black people aren't in that story, then you assume that means we haven't done anything important. Mm-hmm. And if we had, wouldn't our teachers teach that to us? Wouldn't it be in our textbooks? Wouldn't it be, you know, who we name streets after? Or when we go to a museum, wouldn't we see the contributions of Black people on the wall? So your world is like really small. And then I take this course and I'm like, I'm learning more history about Black people than I've learned in my entire life in 3 months. And what that taught me was that what they're calling history is not history. It's what some powerful person decided they were going to teach us about history. And that really set me on what has become a lifelong quest to understand that history, to make that history accessible to regular folks. And then, yeah, the book Before the Mayflower. I was 15 years old. Mm-hmm. I borrowed that book. We could call that a long-term loan because I still have it. And I know I look very young, but I have not been 15 in a long time. And it was like page 34. Like, I love that I have the book because I can go back and see all my highlights from my 15-year-old mind and like what stuck out to me as a 15-year-old child. And seeing that, oh, that's what the title of the book means, Before the Mayflower. He's not talking about Africa. He's actually saying there was another ship called the White Lion that came a year before the Mayflower. Yet we all learn about the Mayflower, but not the White Lion, and that there's a reason for that. So absolutely, the origin story of the 1619 Project for me was that one book, right? And that one date in that one book, and Lerone Bennett saying that this was one of the most important ships ever to sail, and yet it had been erased. So what we call history, y'all, is memory. It's not history, because all those things happen, but it's memory.
Interesting, because Nikole and I were talking back there in the green room about, and I didn't want to give too much space to the naysayers.
I have naysayers?
But you know, I'm always good for a good chuckle. You can ask my producer Daniel over there. One of your naysayers said that, well, the Africans that were captured, the Africans that were brought on the White Lion were actually indentured servants, and that you had got it wrong.
Yeah, so, yeah. One, I think it's interesting because I actually don't even think it's relevant what you call them, right? But clearly they were enslaved because indentured servants, as we know, were people who entered into a contract for their labor. That labor got them passage, right? That contract got them passage to the New World, and then they had a term of time, usually 7 years. It was a very brutal form of unfree labor, but it wasn't slavery. But so 2 things. Obviously, if someone kidnaps me, forces me on a boat against my will, I don't make a contract, I don't want to come to the United States, and you can make me work for as long as you want to. I don't know what y'all call that.
Right.
But Webster's Dictionary calls that slavery.
Right.
But the other thing is, it also told me that they're not up to date on the recent scholarship. So most of the critiques about the project would presume that I would just carelessly write things in the New York Times that could not be backed up by scholarship. It's the New York Times.
Right.
I mean, we have, I don't even know how many millions of readers across the globe. So I went to the landing spot, Hampton. I talked with the scholars who have studied the first landing. I looked at the evidence that they accrued to say that these were enslaved people, and that is what the scholarship says. So when I hear things like that, you always have to question the motivation. Another thing I teach my students, right? Always question, who does the narrative serve and why? Now, the project was worthy of critique. You can't do any ambitious project and expect that it won't be critiqued, that it should be critiqued. It absolutely should. But when people who they themselves are not up on the latest scholarship, who want to say we weren't enslaved, let's say we weren't. What does that change? If we weren't enslaved in 1619, we know slavery was codified by 1640. We know that from 1640 until 1865, 95% of black people in this country were enslaved. So again, what was the motivation? But the beauty of the book versus the magazine, I don't know how many of y'all saw the original project when it came out. The beauty of the book versus the magazine is there are 1,000 endnotes in this book. So y'all don't have to believe me, just believe the scholars and the academic historians whose work is footnoted in the book.
And we should note, absolutely. Because in the hood, we call them haters. And we should note that 21 haters, who are also considered scholars, actually wrote to the Pulitzer Board, which, yes, that Pulitzer Board that gives out an amazing award every year. This is a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. 21 haters wrote to the board and wanted them to rescind your Pulitzer Prize.
Yes.
Those are haters, everybody. Let's talk about
those were some haters now. But you know what? And this is the thing, like, I actually take great pride in this, right? I think about, and Lord knows, please don't take this as me comparing myself to Toni Morrison. I am not. But what I'm saying is when Toni Morrison was awarded the Nobel Prize, you saw the same exact effort to discredit her. You saw an effort for them to say now the Nobel Prize has been despoiled because this black woman who wrote this trash is not deserving of the Nobel, right? So we already know that there's certain people who don't ever think that black people who are very unapologetically black, who write black things for black people, should ever be able to win these highest awards. So when I see that, one, they obviously weren't successful. I would stack my resume up against theirs any day.
That's where you should.
And I take these things really as a badge of honor, right? I really do. I mean, at the time, you see they're trying to humiliate you. That's why they did it. They knew the Pulitzer wasn't going to rescind, but they were trying to humiliate me. But it didn't work because I really think I had ancestors on my side.
There you go. Let's talk about the collection of scholars and academics that you all did enlist for this, because I have to give, and I don't know if she's here, but Carol Anderson, who is really just one of my favorite people in the world, is a professor over at Emory University, and her book on her chapter on defense. And if you haven't read Carol Anderson's book, The Second, you gotta get it. After you get Nicole's, get Professor Carol Anderson's called The Second. It tells you the history of what the Second Amendment was really about. So yeah, check that out. But that's her essay on the Second was just brilliant. Brilliant about what the Second Amendment was really created because they didn't want the enslaved to bear arms because they might have an uprising against you know who. And what's also interesting that I love about the 1619 Project, Nikole, that you all did was also educating people about the colonies, the northern and southern colonies and how different they were, and the Federalists. And people that tell you that history is not important, don't believe that. History is very important. Very important. How did you all come up with the list? Who was going to write what? How did you reach out to these? Did you have anybody said, nah, I don't want to do that because you can call them out right now because now they feel silly. They ain't in the book.
So yes, y'all should definitely read Carol Anderson. You should also read her book, White Rage. She's a historian, but she writes for like us, like a common reader. A lot of times, you know, the reason I became a journalist and not a historian is I wanted people to read what I wrote. Just kidding. Just playing. But you know, historians write in a different type of language.
They use big words sometimes.
They do. And
is Maurice Hobson here? Because he used big words too. Brother, you gotta shorten like and the and is. Yeah, they use them.
You know,
we
just need a little excitement.
Yeah,
a little excitement. And she's able to take these really complex histories and break them down into like a digestible size text. Like her books are like this thick. So putting together this book, I'm the face of the book. I created it, but if you open the book, you see most of the book is not written by me. And it was like my absolute nerd fantasy to be able to just sit down and write out who is everyone I would like to see in this book. What are the scholars who have taught me what I know? And that's who we called for the original project. Literally just put a list of scholars. Before we even picked which like subjects we were going to cover, I held like a big nerd fest brainstorming session at the New York Times with scholars like Martha Jones, Taya Miles, Khalil Muhammad, and we just sat in a room together and came up with ideas of what we thought it should cover. So that's really, everybody in this book are people who I read. There were a handful of folks who couldn't do the original project. They lived to regret that. And with the original project, for the book, we're then able to expand and double the amount of essays. So a lot of folks like Carol wasn't able, she was working on another book, so she wasn't able to write for the first one. I came back to her for this one, and she did. Ibram X. Kendi was working on his own book, wasn't able to write for the first one, came back and wrote for this one. But I also just quickly want to say, if you look at the book, one of my favorite parts that I don't get to talk about enough is the poetry and prose that's in the book. So there are a lot of essays, but between every single essay is an original piece of poetry or original piece of prose. And this was fun because I got to reach out to Black writers that normally would not be in a book like this. So Terry McMillan, right? You would not typically find her in a book like this, but she wrote a short piece of fiction that's in the book. Barry Jenkins, the director, Oscar award-winning director of Moonlight, would not typically be in a book like this, but was able to write a short piece. And those pieces were what we called like a historical timeline, where because Black Americans, of course, were the only people in the history of the United States who were not allowed to learn to read and write during slavery, we don't always have the documentary or archival records that other people have to go back and look at these historical moments. So often, when we can find that history, it's being told through the white lens. And so with this, what we call a literary timeline, we asked some of our greatest writers to reimagine these moments in history and tell them from a Black point of view.
Why poetry in between these essays?
I wish I could take credit for that idea. It wasn't my idea. The editor-in-chief of the magazine, Jake Silverstein, his father's a poet. He loves poetry. And we were trying to figure out, because the essays, it's not a comprehensive history. These essays are spanning a lot of history, trying to make an argument. But we also realize, like, Americans learn this history so poorly. There's just so much they don't know. So how could we fill in the gaps, but in a way that's interesting? And that's when he was like, we should do poetry, and we could come up with this like literary timeline. And so that was the idea. But it also just works as a break, right? The essays are long, they are dense, they are hard.
Yeah.
And in between, you get these like little breaths of air. I'll say that the first person I thought of when we decided to do the poetry and prose was Sonia Sanchez. And I was like, she has to be in the project. And she wasn't able to do it. Actually, at that time, Toni Morrison was gravely ill and was getting ready to transition. And Sonia calls me and she's like, I want to do it, but I just can't. I'm taking care of, Toni, they were very close. They're like, Sonia's one of the last of that generation of writers. And she was like, I just can't. She was so apologetic. I'm like, you don't have to apologize, I get it. And I didn't even know we were going to turn it into a book, but I was a little heartbroken. So when we got the book contract, she was the first person I called. And I was like, can you write the last poem for the book? And she was so grateful because she wanted to be in the book. And so the very last poem is Sonia Sanchez.
Oh, wow. Was there someone that you all were hoping to get, but just through scheduling, they just couldn't get them? And who was that?
Isabel.
Yeah.
She was working on cast. So I guess I give her a pass.
She was a little busy.
But I love that woman to death. She lives in Atlanta. Her book, Warmth of Other Suns, was just transformative for me. But also, she was the first Black woman to ever win a Pulitzer Prize for journalism.
Yeah.
And this was in the 90s, not that long ago, right? So she's just someone, her writing, her historical research, I wanted her to actually write the essay that became Leslie and Michelle Alexander's essay, linking the Haitian Revolution to the Black freedom struggle in the United States. If I ever am able to do another version of 1619, I don't know what I'm gonna have to do, but I'm gonna have to stalk her, go break it to her house or something to make it. Just kidding, y'all. It's okay. I'm not.
I want to read something because I was watching something. You were recently with Spike Lee. You were introducing Spike Lee, and you said, quote, "My work is to ensure that before you ever learn about the Mayflower in 1620, you're going to learn about that ship in 1619 called the White Lion. You're going to learn about our stories of resistance, of the contributions of Black Americans, and we will not be erased from the narrative of this country that our ancestors built," close quote. Someone said to me, Nikole is like our hip hop artist of history. I'm like, oh, so she's like Queen Latifah. You're like you're MC. You're a journalist MC. It's able to bring the history to the people in a way that resonates and that hits so many different generations. You like that?
I do. I didn't even know she was gonna say that when I wore this graffiti dress. See, my bamboo earrings, at least 2 pair.
LL out there smiling somewhere. Yeah, you are. I mean, that's because for a generation, and I have nieces and nephews. Some of them don't read at all, but they read this. They're reading this. And I sent them a link because you were on our show a few years ago, and I sent them a link. Like, yeah, she kind of cool. She dope. She kind of fiery like you, Auntie. I'm like, yeah, okay, all right. Yeah. And there have been a lot of great storytellers, a lot of great journalists, a lot of great scholars. And you said, you were joking, you had how many followers on Twitter? 200? And now? Come on now. You accept this title?
Man, it's wild. I was telling you that story because truly at heart, I'm just this little Black girl from Waterloo, Iowa, right? I'm from a no-name town in a flyover state that most people don't even know has black people in it. I go home to that same exact community that built me, and I buy $5 Hennessy shots at the bar. When I go home, I'm balling, y'all. Like, I could ball out at home. So do I accept it? You know, I'm aware of my stature now. And I just try to use it responsibly. I try to use my platform at all times to uplift black people, to uplift marginalized people, for a common good, to call out people when I feel they're not living up to what I think we should be doing as a collective in society. I try to take that with an extreme amount of responsibilities, because one thing I understand, thank you, I have my hometown tattooed on my wrist. And I got that on my wrist when I won the MacArthur grant, because I really wanted to remind myself that you come from the dirt and you can be returned to the dirt. And so as soon as you start feeling yourself or thinking you're better than other people, you'll be humbled. Now, I could live in the dirt. I don't want to go back to that, though, so I'm trying to put out good karma into the world, right? But I just always am reminded, if y'all watch the documentary, you see my people. I'm not ashamed of where I come from. You know, so often when you come from a certain type of community, people tell you that you should leave that community, that you should distance yourself. They want to know, how did you make it in spite of? I made it because of that community. Like, truly. So I go out into the world that way. And the last thing I'll say quickly, I'll never forget. So, you know, there's that saying, don't meet your heroes, right? It's often true.
Wow.
So I'll never forget, I'm not going to name this writer. Famous black woman writer. I had admired my whole life. I went to a book event with her. Me and my girlfriends waited in line for a really long time. We go up to get the book signed. She was so incredibly rude to my friend, right? So rude that after the book got signed, my friend did not buy the book. She went and put it back on the bookshelf at the store, and we left. Now, she could have just been having a bad day. We all can, right? And when you always have people in your face, sometimes you're tired. But I never forgot, I'm like, the only impression we will ever have of her now is that one moment. It may not have been reflective of who she was. It may, like, we are entitled to a bad day. And so I just never want someone who has admired me, whose my work has had an impact on them, to walk away with that feeling from me. And so I just carry, I carry that privilege, that tremendous privilege that, you know, y'all, it's a Sunday afternoon. You have so many things you could be doing. If you're like me, your kid probably called you 10 times about what's for dinner, right? Like, there's a lot of things that you could be doing. And the fact that folks would take an hour, 2 hours out of their day to come and talk about these really hard things with me, I'm grateful every day for that.
We appreciate that. I had an educator reach out to me, and she wanted me to tell you this. I taught from the 1619 Project in our fall 2019 Human Rights course at Freedom U. It was such a great teaching tool and really got our Black, Brown, Indigenous, and Asian students talking. And Freedom University here in Atlanta it's an institution that takes students, they may be documented or whatever, they don't care about that, they're just helping these kids. So she wanted me to pass that on to you. Yeah. Which leads me to this, because the 1619 Project has spurred into so many other things. Young Hulu now, you know, podcasts, you know, curriculum. But I imagine that piece of it as well, that this is being taught in schools, is probably really, really endearing for you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So anyone can go on to 1619education.org and see the way that educators all over the country are turning 1619 Project into curriculum, the way that it's being used in everything from church schools to law schools and everything in between. It's just, you know, it's amazing, because again, I go back to my African American Studies class with Mr. Ray Dow, and how when he put before the Mayflower in my hand, and how that changed my understanding of the world and my place in it as a black girl, that the 1619 Project can have a similar impact on young people of all races. And frankly, that's where all the attacks came from. Is once it became clear that the project was going into classrooms and that young people were going to grow up with a different understanding of the country than many of us had, then you started seeing, governors losing their mind, senators losing their mind. I understand Cobb County banned me.
There
Yes.
we go.
Yes.
They had your back. They had your back.
I appreciate y'all, because the truth is there are parents who have been fighting back against these bans all over the country and have been successful in repealing them. But here's what we have to understand about people who want to ban books or the teaching of ideas. They know they can't make a better argument.
Absolutely.
Because if you thought you were right, that your version of history was right, that your version of the world was right, and that you could beat the argument, you just would. But when you can't, you want to suppress it and you want to ban it. But the thing we know, coming from folks who it was illegal for us to learn to read or write, do you know public education in the South was born in Georgia? Did y'all know that? Did you know it was born of formerly enslaved people who went into the state legislature and demanded common schools for all children, including white children? Did you know that history? If you don't, right? So think about that, though. Think about the stereotype of black people is that we don't value education. That, in fact, we're the only people in the history of all humanity who don't like books and don't value an education, despite the fact that, again, here in Georgia, even during slavery, there were black folks who would form their own undercover schools. They would dig pits in the forest, go down in the pit and teach each other on Sunday, the one day they had off, right? So when you know that history, that it was black legislatures who came out of the cotton field into the state capitol who demanded public education in Georgia, and then that spreads across the South, does that not change your perspective? Do you not see why they want to ban our history? Because how empowering is that to a black child who's being told, you just don't care about school and education to know that?
And then,
That's a whole different lecture. I'll give y'all the rest of the Georgia lecture later.
well, I'm going to add to it, because then in 1954, after Brown versus the Board of Education, Georgia didn't want to integrate. We had white legislators that were like, no, we're not going to do that. I feel like there's a volume 2.
Could be, but
Yeah.
I'm not going to do it.
When you think back to August 18th, when we started this conversation, August 18th, 2019, and now, and I love asking these cerebral questions. Rose Scott and her cerebral questions. And if anyone had said, oh, Nikole, look what's going to happen with this, would you have believed it?
Hell no.
I love the fact that you cuss.
A lot. Look, they call our people Mississippi mudcaps. That's
I know. My folks from Natchez and Shaw, I know.
Yeah, we don't put on air. Sometimes cursing is the best language. I mean, I really do. I think part of the reason I'm able to connect with people is I'm just the same person. In any space, I don't care where I am, I'm the same person. And
You wear them earrings?
y'all see me every day. Surprised I don't have Jordans on today, as you know. But no, it's just been, I don't know. I can't see. Are all y'all old in here mostly?
Be seasoned.
There's some young people in here? Okay. I mean, you could self-define as young. I would count myself in that, but what I think is important is, please understand when I say that me being here, there was nothing inevitable about any of this. When I say I worked 2 jobs till I was 30 years old, I worked 2 jobs till I was 30 years old, right? I graduated from Notre Dame and had to work part-time at Subway to make ends meet with a Notre Dame degree. When I moved to Atlanta for a short period, I was working as a receptionist at American Honda. And I worked at, was it Macy's or Rich's? Macy's on the weekend, right? I remember the first time I saved $1,000 from my second job, I felt like I had made it because I actually had $1,000 in the bank account. I went to graduate school. I started working at the mattress store during graduate school, got my first journalism job with a master's degree, and couldn't make ends meet. Well, I could make ends meet, but I needed to live a little bit more than making ends meet. I had a damn master's degree, right? So I worked at the newspaper during the day, and I sold mattresses on nights and weekends. I was 30 years old.
Yeah.
You know, so we have to demystify success. We have to understand that oftentimes for young people, the journey, and I'm comparing myself to other people who seem like they are getting ahead. Like, it seems like their life is working out great, and here I am still working 2 jobs. I was a great mattress salesperson, by the way. And it actually was one of the best jobs I ever had, because when nobody was in there, I'd be on that Tempur-Pedic reclining bed, reading books. Right, but I also think like having to have humility.
Absolutely.
You know, I remember working the subway with my Notre Dame degree and how people would come in and talk to me. Because they assumed they knew everything about you by the job that you had.
Absolutely.
And I wasn't going to tell them, I don't need to bring out my credentials, because we need to treat people with dignity and respect no matter what they do.
Absolutely.
So anyway, I just say that to say nothing about my life was predictable. And I'm reminded every day that I go home to people who don't live like me, who still struggle, who still work at the Tyson plant. And I think that's what always keeps me grounded, is I know who I do this work for ultimately.
Absolutely. Nikole Hannah-Jones. First of all, let me say this. Do not get mad if your question don't get asked. That's number 1. Number 2, y'all ready? Yeah. Who's got a question? All right. How am I do this? Yeah. Brother right here with the glasses.
District you was talking about where they are banning all types of stuff, and it's just discerning to me, because as an educator, it's like we're put on like pins and needles, and so I guess my question is, what can we do to combat that? Because our biggest issue is education and the lack thereof, and I feel like they're not addressing it enough when it comes to education. So I feel like we're talking about everything else, but we're not talking about education. We're talking about prison, but we're not talking about, okay, what's bringing them to prison? They're not learning, they're not reading. We talk about voting, but again, people don't read, so how can you expect people to vote? So I feel like we're not addressing the structural issue. And so I want to know, what can we do to address that?
So much.
Okay, well, 1, thank you for being an educator. What's your name again, brother?
Paul, Dr. Renaissance. I have a podcast too.
What's the podcast called?
It's called Point of View Uncensored.
Point of View Uncensored. Dr. Renaissance. Okay, thank you. So I know y'all know how rare it is for our young people to be able to learn from a black male educator. And if you know my story, you know it was a black male educator named Mr. Dial that put that book in my hand, that put me on the course. He's in the documentary. I brought him on stage with me in Waterloo. He still kept my senior project where I talked about 1619. So what you do, please understand, is so important for our kids, and not just black kids. Because the research shows that children of all races, if they have a single black educator, are more likely to graduate, but particularly our children. So thank you. You know, I'm not sure if you want me to ask about how do you push back against the bans, or just the larger structural issues with inequality in the schools, but I'm gonna answer the bans part. So let's just be clear. Part of the reason our students who struggle academically is they learn a curriculum that is not relevant to their lives, that's not reflective of their experiences and their histories, that makes them feel excluded. Again, when you think about me growing up, if my history is teaching me that black people have done nothing of worth, if I read in my English class and I never read a single black author, if I don't learn about a single black scientist, and then you want to tell me education matters, why would I believe that? Right? And then you have me in schools that the facilities don't tell me education matters. In fact, the facilities tell me, y'all actually don't think my education is that important at all. So our kids get the message, and then we blame them when they get the message. And then we want to ban any type of text that actually, as the research shows, black kids who get access to black history are more academically proficient and are more likely to graduate. So when they're banning our history, it's not just about banning what they're teaching, they're actually making it harder for our students to achieve. So we need to understand that. And for all students, because white students, Latino students, Asian students are also going out into a multicultural world, and they will be ill-prepared as they come from a state like this that wants to insulate them from a true understanding of history, and then they come to college in other states with kids who did get that history and understanding. We're actually putting them all behind. But what I want to quickly say is, you shouldn't be the one having to do that battle, because that's your job. It has to be us, the parents in the community, activists in the community, who have your back. Because what I've seen is teachers will stand up, then the community won't have their back, and then the teacher is penalized. So you look like you got your little activist circle over here. Y'all know I was an education reporter before the 1619 Project, okay? And what I can tell you, all of these bans, all of these laws, they get passed because 5 noisy, loud people can show up to a school board meeting. 5. Right? It doesn't even take a lot. So why can't y'all be the 5 and turn it the other way? That's all I'm saying.
Thank you, Nikole.
Hi, Nikole, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for writing the book. I was born in 1966, and as a 6-year-old, I found Before the Mayflower on my bookshelf. And as a child, even though I could not read the big words, I still looked at the pictures, and as I got older, it became an important text to me. And From Slavery to Freedom by John Hope Franklin also. See, people, my mama bought me books and got me a library card when I was 5. My question to you is, in 2010, University of North Carolina decided to use the African American Studies program as like classes for their athletes to pass. And to me, it besmirched the academic quality and what that meant. I was hurt by that. I'd just like to know your opinion on that. Thank you.
So I'm gonna take that as a rhetorical question. Because this is gonna be the shortest answer I have to give. My opinion is the same as yours.
Oh, that's it?
That was it.
Okay. Next question. Why don't you all just line up over here and come over here? Thank you.
Nikole.
Now, what's this? What you got?
This is Nikole.
Okay.
See, this is for Nikole. Like you were saying, we need the family, the parents to promote you guys. I want you to know our job is to promote you guys. So you see, I got your flyer here. I let the whole world know Nikole gonna be here tonight. Okay. And also, I had for the Poor People's Campaign. Like you say, our job is to let the community know that y'all know about the Poor People's Campaign, right? Well, y'all don't know. Y'all young. But look at Nikole, know, right? Nikole, the Poor People's Campaign with William Barber.
I'm young.
Oh, you know what I mean? These are nieces and nephews, though.
Okay. I'm not that young.
I'm not trying to promote anything. This is Dr. King's Poor People's Campaign that I know some of y'all know about. They're going to be meeting the 27th of this month. And you can register. They get on the bus. They're going to do Dr. King thing. They went to Virginia. And they're going to march on Washington on the 29th. Now, why I'm saying this here? Because you have to be notified. My job is to let you know. But also, Nikole was talking about history. Now, American Historical Society, Michigan State, Black MV Patent, put it in your phone, Black MVP Patents, PATENTS.org. It's talking about black inventors. It was started at Michigan State. This is our 10th year. Now, I believe most people here do not even never heard of Black MV Patent. Raise your hand. BlackMVPatents.org, raise your hand. Okay. Okay, Black MV Patent, right? 10 years ago, right? So it's about black inventors which invented everything. So like you say, our job in the community is to say these things. So that's why I'm here to say we are doing things. Okay, blackenvypact.org for Black Invention.
Sister, thank you so much, sister. Where do they find out about the information on the Poor People's Campaign? Where do they go? No, I'm talking about everybody else.
Okay, well, I'll bet you. I ain't want to.
Just tell them the website or wherever they go.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, 'cause I don't want to be saying too much. Okay. Yeah, no. I want Sandman to come get you. Okay.
I got you right here. Just go to poorpeoplescampaign.org. Y'all got it?
Oh, that made sense.
Just go to poorpeoplescampaign.org. It's Saturday, June 29, 2024.
And they're going to be getting on the bus on the 27th.
Y'all gonna get on the bus on the 27th here in Atlanta. It's free.
We're going to stop in Virginia.
We're gonna stop in Virginia at the churches.
Dr. King did.
Dr. King did. We're gonna march.
Y'all got
Y'all
it?
gonna be there. All right.
Reverend William Barber.
I love you, Auntie. What you got? What's
Okay,
your name?
thank you.
Hello, my name is Chloe Anise Collier. I just want to say I'm very grateful for you to be here. We have the 1619 Project in our house and Born on the Water, and I read it to my siblings often, so
Thank
you for coming. My question is, just how insightful, impactful, and enlightening do you think the 1619 Project was coming out just before the year 2020, when we witnessed the brutal killings of Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and the year 2021 on January 6th, when we saw the entitlement of pro-Trump rioters on the Capitol building of the U.S.
Hold on. Where you go to school?
I'm homeschooled. My mother is a historian, archivist, and curator, sitting right over there. Erica Brayboy Collier.
Okay, Mom. Okay.
17.
Thank you. So, I clearly, when I created the 1619 Project, could not have predicted where our country would go, except you kind of can. Right? Because history does echo. Like, again, I think what the power of the project is, it shows you that everything we're seeing was built on things that happened before, and that if we don't learn about those things, if we don't guard about them, they're going to happen again, and we are. I think, the period after Reconstruction, which, of course, Reconstruction was that brief 12 years where we attempted multiracial democracy. The period after that, the white folks called that redemption, right? Because they were redeeming the white supremacist South and the white supremacist nation. We are entering another period of redemption right now, believe me. So I think that when I saw January 6th, the first thing that came to my mind, two things. I saw so many white commentators go on TV and say, nothing like this has ever happened in the United States before. And I said, Wilmington, 1898, New Orleans, all of the governments, biracial governments that were overthrown during Reconstruction, of course it's happened before. So that tells you that we are learning a segregated history. And that one group of us are getting a more accurate version of history, and another are getting a version of American history that actually explains nothing about the country we live in, right? And then the second thing I thought was that 1776, that does not explain January 6th, but 1619 does.
Absolutely.
So that's my thoughts, is it wasn't, it wasn't that I was somehow able to predict America. It's that the project understands America.
One last thing I'll say is that while I was watching the attack on the Capitol building, I remember a CNN reporter saying, this is the most un-American thing. Nothing like this should ever happen in America. And I'm thinking, I was raised by a historian archivist, so I understand these events well. This is the most American thing I've ever
100%.
seen.
100%. You go, girl. Now the only thing I'm gonna say to you, Mom, the only thing I'm gonna say is I feel like your child needs to be in a classroom with some other kids so he can rub some of that off on some other children. Okay? That's all I'm saying. But yes, beautiful.
Good afternoon. Two pieces. Number one, Rose, you do beautiful work. Thank you. Thank you. And you. Number two, Miss Jones. Your situation at Chapel Hill. You handled it beautifully. You handled it brilliantly, precisely, and gracefully. And as a woman, as a black woman, as a beautiful black woman, as an intelligent black woman, as you, I thank you for that. I thank you for that. My question is, 2020 hindsight, is there something that you would have done differently in terms of your response to the situation at Chapel Hill? And thank you for your presence. Thank you for 1619, and God bless you.
By the way, this is the Deb Moore from WCLK, by the way. Broadcasting legend here in Atlanta.
Hence the "the," right? The "the" in front of your name. Thank you so much. I don't think I would have done anything differently in response to UNC Chapel Hill, actually. I would have done things differently in a lot of other areas of my life, but that was one of the times where I really just used what they tried to do to me. If you recall, I just got silent, which is when y'all should have known. I didn't tweet, I didn't say anything, I didn't respond to anything. I just started plotting. I started plotting because by that time I had been under attack for 6-7 months straight. And name dragged through the mud, people threatened me, threatened to burn my mom's house down. Like, it had been a lot. And this was to the people who tried to take that tenure from me, was to be my final humiliation, right? That's how they planned it. So, you know, I'm a person who had spent all of my life studying power when I never had it. But in that moment, I knew I had it, right? So I have to say, the day it became a national news story, I already knew exactly what I was going to do. I just had to set it up. I knew I wasn't going to UNC no matter what they did. I knew I wasn't going to no white school no matter what they did. I knew I was going to go to a HBCU. I knew I was going to raise all this money. And everything was specific. The white man, Walter Hussman, who was given everything he ever had in life, inherited a newspaper, inherited his job, went to UNC, didn't have to work for anything, and they're gonna tell me what's a real journalist? Okay. This man pledged 25 million. Didn't give, but pledged 25 million. So I said, I'm gonna raise 25 million for black folks, and that's what I did. All right. So, no. In that case, and y'all, this is the last thing I'm gonna say. I had my LeBron James moment. I don't know if y'all saw my Gayle King interview. Right, but I was like, once they voted for my tenure, y'all can see this is a happy moment in my life. I love this. This is like top 10 moments of my whole life. Once I had decided I was going to Howard, I raised my money, and then it was a young person on the one student member of the Board of Trustees at the University of North Carolina, the one student who forced them to vote. All these grown people were too cowardly to even force the vote. And he forced the vote. They approved the tenure. I knew they were gonna approve it at that point. And then I didn't say whether I was going or not. And we executed for me to go on CBS on the morning show with Gayle King. And Gayle was like, so Nikole, what's your decision? And I said, well, Gayle, I will not be going to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I will be going to Howard University. You know? So, and let me tell y'all, if there is one thing I hope you take from that, right? People think they have power over you, but they don't.
Absolutely.
Howard, they couldn't have given me a better thing. I love Howard so much. I wish I had gone to Howard. I'm living my best life. Thank you.
Now, I know Nikole is going to sign some books, and I really want to get to all of y'all. I could have a dance-off to
Speed
see
round.
who gets the last question. But real quickly, which question?
I'm going to do a speed round.
Speed run. can reparations effectively address the legacy and the harm caused by white supremacy? We're doing good work in Atlanta. We're going to do more. As it evolves, can we make it work for something meaningful?
Thank you. Ooh, I'm glad. We didn't even get to talk about reparations. The quick answer is reparations will not cure white supremacy. Reparations will not stop everything else that black people suffer from. But I think we'd rather suffer from it with money than without.
That part. That part.
Hi. Governor Kemp recently signed vouchers here in Georgia. And I also saw that yesterday you had some statements regarding Jay-Z's part in working with the field schools regarding budget in schools, which, you know, I know they're harmful, you know you're harmful, maybe people here don't understand why they are.
Okay, so
vouchers. Ooh,
one,
we got you today.
Black millionaire capitalists will not save our people. Let's be clear. Let's just be clear. Voucher programs do not benefit poor black people. They are sold as a benefit to poor black people. That's why the people who pass them use us as a ploy to defund public education, where most of our kids are going to go. And what they tell you is, well, why shouldn't poor black kids have the same choices as rich kids? A $10,000 voucher don't give you the same choices as rich kids. A $10,000 voucher will have you in somebody's church basement learning a curriculum that the research shows actually harms black kids' education. Black achievement declines in voucher programs. And when the kids leave the voucher program and come back to the public schools, we actually see a bump in achievement. So let's just be clear. They sell, the only way they know they can get vouchers passed is the first day we're doing this to even the playing field for poor kids. Then as soon as they get that voucher law passed, then they go to a universal voucher program. And the only people who can benefit from that are people who already don't have their kids in the public schools. So they're just getting a rebate. And they already were paying for private schools, and middle-class parents who can afford to add their own $20,000 to that $10,000 to get into the best private schools. So please, y'all, do not be a ploy for the destruction of public education that most of our kids will depend. And Jay-Z needs better advisors.
Yes, he does.
Hey, I'm a public policy attorney, and as a black woman, even in progressive spaces, I'm getting used to hearing the word no or my ideas being devalued. I'm curious what keeps you going or kept or keeps, and what keeps you confident?
Well, one, we need black women in public policy spaces. Even though it's hard, we have to have a seat at the table. Here's one thing that we all should just be honest about when it comes to progressivism. It's easy to be progressive on trees, on gay rights, on, a whole bunch of other issues, but when it comes to race, most progressives don't look that much different from conservatives, let's be real. And in fact, the difference is often that, white conservatives, it's very clear how they feel. White progressives often think that they're not like that, and they are, right? So these can be some of the worst spaces. Now, you also can find white progressives who are self-reflective, who understand how to support black leadership, how not to try to tell black folks what's best for them, but actually support them. So how you survive is you have to find those folks, because they do exist, right? And the other thing is, what I've learned has benefited me my entire life is I just have low expectations of most people. If I don't expect too much from you, you'll rarely disappoint me, and every once in a while you'll surprise me.
All right, our last question. Thank you so much. Thank you for that, Nikole.
So I wanted to ask you, this is something I wanted to ask you since I saw it. When you had that Twitter post about the speech that you did for MLK Day, and you completely used all of his quotes, and basically at the end it was like, if you're not on board with this, then you would not have been on board with him. Did you ever get any feedback from those people that you called out? Did anybody ever reach out and say, you opened my eyes or anything? After I read that, I just always wanted to know if somebody came around.
First of all, you killing that dress. That dress is real cute.
I made it. I made this.
You made that dress? What? You got an Instagram? What? Do you sell dresses? What's going on?
So my Instagram is Sweet Nectar by Ayana.
Sweet Nectar, okay.
So yes, I do make dresses.
We will not forget that one. All right then. But the short answer is no. I never heard from those people that I did make a fool out of. That was an amazing moment in my life as well. And in fact, I heard that this is the odd thing. I heard from a black woman who was on the Union League board who felt that I was unfair because most of the people were in support, and so I shouldn't have focused on those people who weren't and made the Union League look bad. So that's the only feedback I got on that. But people in the audience that day were super appreciative, including, do y'all know Father Flegler?
Yes.
In Chicago? He was at my table and he was the loudest one, shaming everybody up in there. So yeah, it was an amazing moment. But I don't expect, I have low expectations of people. And what I'm hoping when I did that was, I was really more so speaking to the white moderate that King often talked about, which is people who want to today use that one line from Dr. King. It's always the one line. I'm like, y'all haven't even read the full speech. You certainly haven't read King post 1963. And so I really wanted to just use that moment to educate people on the fact that y'all would have hated King just like you did back then, because King was not a whitewashed person, right? So, but no, there was maybe it got lost in the mail. Maybe they mailed me and it got lost. Thank you. Sweet Nectar.
Aye, Sweet Nectar. First of all, thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Nikole appreciates it. I know you signed some books earlier that you did.
Yeah, all the books are pre-signed.
They're all pre-signed. There's some books out there for sale. Thank you all so much. Nikole, listen, sister, whatever your next project is, we got your back. Nikole Hannah-Jones, everybody.